and welcome to another episode of Hot Takes with me, the Silver Fox. And in this episode, we're going to take a look at the timeline of House of the Dragon. And it appears that it's a little bit earlier than was initially thought. So there's an article now in Screen Rant that is telling us exactly that the timeline is set further back than the initial sort of 180 to 200 years that we thought. And there's also rumour which has it that the initial first series will be set over a 20-year period, which is something else we could have a look at. Anyway, first of all, I'll get down into the Screen Rant article and we'll take a look. So here it is. House of the Dragon's timeline is earlier than we thought, and that's good, said Screen Rant. So the House of the Dragon's Harrenhal tease suggests its timeline goes back much earlier than expected, which can be a major asset to the prequel series. Well, it gives us more time to play with, and you can get more things in. You can do a lot more, how can we say, setting up the causalities of things and setting up character arcs if you've got sort of that depth of time. It gives you more of a skeleton to hang the flesh on, if you like. Anyway, getting into the article, House of the Dragon is taking place much earlier in the Game of Thrones timeline than previously expected, which now allows a prequel to better contextualise the warring Targaryen characters in their battle for the Iron Throne. Based on George R.R. Martin's Targaryen family history book Fire and Blood, House of the Dragon's central event is the much chronicled Targaryen Civil War, the Dance of the Dragons. This feud took place between 129 AC and 131 AC, that is to say approximately 170 years before Game of Thrones timeline begins. However, House of the Dragon's trailer has now teased the inclusion of certain events that take place decades earlier. The trailer for House of the Dragon seems to depict Harrenhal, with the castle being significant during this era as the location where the Great Council of 101 AC is held. The Great Council at Harrenhal saw many High Lords in Westeros decide who would be king after the death of Jaehaerys I, as the majority of his heirs had predeceased him. With only his 4 grandchildren, Rhaenys, Viserys, Daemon and Aemma, and their heirs bringing forth claims, the Great Council decided that Jaehaerys' successor would be his previous heir, Balon's eldest son, Viserys. This decision meant passing over his eldest grandchild, Rhaenys' son Lenor Valerian, who would eventually marry House of the Dragon's Rhaenyra Targaryen, and thus start the process of the Targaryen Civil War. Now, it's very similar to English history, really, with the War of the Roses. The Great Council at Harrenhal is apt to be the source of much contention between House Targaryen's family members in House of the Dragon, so it makes much sense to include it early on in the series. If the House of the Dragon's trailer Harrenhal tease truly does mean an early scene or flashback to the Great Council, the prequel's timeline will be going back decades earlier than previously thought. And while this means the timeline of House of the Dragon will be far more expansive than Game of Thrones, the prequel will greatly benefit from depicting these earlier events. The Great Council of 101 AC will set up many feuds amongst the Targaryens in terms of Rhaenyra's son and his claim being passed over, King Viserys I ascending the throne, and the political marriages that spawned from this event. House of the Dragon has plenty of moving pieces just within the Targaryen family, so contextualising it with events from decades before the Dance of the Dragons will help audiences to fully understand the roots and depths of the rivalries. This is basically for people who haven't read the books, which he should never have written. He should have been concentrating on the other one. 10 years now. 10 years he hasn't finished that book. I think it's never going to be finished. It'll be unfinished. It'll be released as an unfinished tale, and then 20 years later they get someone to finish it. Anyway, House of the Dragon's earlier timeline also suggests that the prequel will feature a more focused deep dive into the character development of the Targaryens at play in Dance of the Dragons. While it was already revealed that the House of the Dragon would depict the teenage years of Rhaenyra Targaryen, the Great Council's timeline allows the series to go further into how the decision for Jaehaerys' successor impacted the dynamics and sentiments of the family's future within House Targaryen. The Great Council's inclusion will help to fully explore why Matt Smith's Daemon Targaryen, long considered himself Viserys' successor, contextualise why the marriage between Rhaenyra and Laenor was so important, and further establish the Westerosi precedent of prioritising a male heir over a female successor, a significant decision that would return for Rhaenyra's claim to the throne over her younger brother, or half-brother, Aegon II. While Game of Thrones' timeline only spanned from 298 to 303 AC, House of the Dragon will now seemingly exhaust the events from at least 101 AC to 131 AC, with the timeline perhaps extending even further to the beginning of Aegon III's reign. This may suggest that the prequel series will have a much faster pace than Game of Thrones, and though it is likely that the timeline between 101 AC and 129 AC will only be depicted in quick flashbacks or prologues. And that's why you're going to get that sort of massive jump quite quickly once we get started, but I'll come to that. However, even if House of the Dragon's characters spend a significant amount of time at the Great Council at Harrenhal or depicting Rhaenyra's childhood, these moments are vital in terms of fully understanding the interfamily feuds at play, particularly for establishing which Targaryens will be seen as the heroes. And ultimately, none of them are the heroes. They're all Targaryens. But yeah, there's that piece. And I'm going to pause it there, and I will come back with the other piece. I'll just flick across now. And this is from the website Winter is Coming. It's a major fan site. And it's claiming that the House of the Dragon Season 1 could span at least 2 decades. And that's because, again, it's what they're reading in to the trailer. And it's just slightly different because they're not looking back at the Harrenhal thing so much. But they're just looking at the growth of characters, the aging of the characters. So the latest trailer for House of the Dragon hit last week, and it set the internet aflame with speculation about what to expect from the Game of Thrones prequel series. How many dragons will we see? Will the characters be able to capture our imagination the way that Daenerys and Jon Snow did? And what's in the box? Open the box, take the money. Now, they've done the thing, they're saying that they've done a scene-by-scene breakdown. And I'm not going to go into all of this. But it's here, this bit. When you look closely at the events shown in the trailer and compare them to the timeline in George R.R. Martin's book Fire and Blood, he gives a pretty good idea of just how much time we'll see elapse in Season 1. And it may be a whole 2 decades. I mean, it's doubtful we'll see everything from those 20 years, just looking more and more likely we'll see flashbacks and time jumps and such. It's also possible HBO will alter timelines and ages as they did with Game of Thrones, but maybe not too much, since we do see younger and older versions of characters like Rhaenyra Targaryen, who's played as a young woman by Millie Alcock and as an adult by Emma Darcy. And when the Millie Alcock is playing her, I think she's just got this stunning, icy look, much more so than Emma Darcy's. But she has that image just looking at you, and she's peering into your soul. It's haunting almost. If they wanted to condense things, the team could have just changed Rhaenyra's age so one actor could convincingly play her over a shorter span of years. But it looks like they're sticking pretty close to the timeline we get in Fire and Blood, even if that makes things tricky for them. And then they go in and say, look at the trailer and that, blah, blah. But basically, I'm not going to go into all of it. It's cut. Things were partially covered in the previous section. But yeah, they're saying that by the use of the younger and then the older characters, or the use of the younger and older actors to portray those characters, should I say, it looks like the whole of Season 1 will cover over 20 years. So it's going to be like the foundation, really, of everything else that comes after it. But I'm pretty excited. I mean, where are we today? It's 2 months, so May, June, July, 3 months. 3 months to go. Less than 100 days. Fewer than 100 days. And I'm building up. I'm thinking this was a show that I didn't want to bother about. It was like, Game of Thrones, and as it approaches, and the more we get, the more we see, the more excited I'm getting. Anyway, I shall round off and come up. Didn't want to drag this too long. Yep, So we're going to have a longer period in which to enjoy the history of Westeros. I think the deeper time is going to be better. I do agree. I think the deeper time will give us more foundation, a wider story base, more possible story arcs. It also means that come later in the production, they can refer back to things that the groundwork has already been laid for. So it gives a more complete and rounded story. I think ultimately it's going to be good anyway. I've got very few problems with this. It's not like the Rings of Power where everything is going to be rubbish. Everything is based on made up, politicized scribblings by talentless writers based on literally that much work. What they're making here is an entire series based on, currently 2 rather large tomes. So it's going to have depth, it's going to have characterization, it's going to have value, I think. I just wish he'd hurry up and finish writing that last book in the original series, because he's going to cark it soon. Anyway, we'll round it there on such a happy note. Sorry, George, do try and write a bit quicker though, Sunshine. If you like what you hear and see on the channel, please consider hitting the subscribe button if you haven't already. Ring the bell for notifications of future output. Leave a like, leave a comment, and until next time, stay safe, stay well, and goodbye.